Picture this. You've scheduled an evening to do nothing but read. You grab your book, maybe a little drink, sit down, open your book, and you just can't do it. You're distracted, can't focus on the words on the page, and your mind feels elsewhere. At this point, you either power through and try to read and end up not enjoying or absorbing the story, or you put the book away and opt for something else instead. And no amount of reading-focused tips or tricks are helping. Sound familiar? It's frustrating, disappointing, and honestly kind of sad. You know you love to read, so why are you finding it so difficult to read right now? For me, this kind of situation has been an ongoing issue, and the worst part, what might have been a once a month kind of struggle, is becoming more and more frequent. I know reading makes me feel better. I know it helps me unwind and relax, so why, right now, am I finding it so difficult? Well, my friend, I have the answer, and I'm not sure you're gonna like it. Let's talk about your brain. This little bugger is likely the cause of a good number of your worries, but today I want to talk about one specific part of your brain that's hardwired and just so happens to be the reason why you're finding it hard to read right now. I know, it sounds silly. Why would our brain be stopping us from reading? After all, there are endless benefits to reading, so surely our brain would want more of that, right? Not in this case.
At least 6 people, including a 6-year-old boy, have been killed by Russian missile attacks overnight. This is the scene of the one apartment building where a missile
famine is playing out in the Gaza Strip. Whilst not being an official declaration of the state of
attention reported to have brought mounting millions of dollars for devastation.
We are living in a time of uncertainty, upheaval, and endless information. If it's not war, it's global natural disasters, economies collapsing, politics, racial injustice, and AI rising. It's constant, devastating, and all-consuming. And because we have access to this information 24/7, it feels like it never ends. News sources never stop reporting, people on the ground create and share content from the source, and the amount of information and detail of information we have access to is unprecedented. This isn't to say any of this is bad, it just is. So how do our brains handle this? Well, let's just say they struggle. Tell me if this sounds like something you experienced. During the pandemic, you started with ambition. It was a scary and uncertain time, but you wanted to use it to do something positive. You'd use the additional time you likely had to read more books. But while you might have started strong, it didn't take long for you to struggle with reading. You couldn't focus. It fell off. At this very time, the term doom scrolling became widely used, as people would use a good chunk of their spare time tracking the latest news from casualties to lockdown details. While all this was going on, our brains were responding in the only way they knew how, treating the situation as if we were in danger. Because, we were. We couldn't focus on reading not because we didn't want to, but because our brains wouldn't let us. It was focused on something far more important, survival. Essentially, we all felt threatened, and so our brain's limbic system drove our fight or flight. In modern times, this means scanning the internet for as much information as possible. You're hypervigilant, and although your brain thinks getting information will help, it doesn't. It just prolongs suffering. For the pandemic, the situation was even worse because the threat felt never ending. There was no relief, no outcome to take us out of that fight or flight. And 5 years later, we're still not out of it. The pandemic may have died down, but it's not fully gone. And here to replace it is a divided world, a collapsing climate, and a widening gap between the super rich and everybody else. In essence, your fight or flight is likely triggered every time you read the news, every time you engage in what's happening in the world, which means you either force reading or you don't and instead reach for your phone. This is the second part to this messed up cocktail, which is, again, all in your brain. While we all know that reading a book is actually a great solution to feeling stressed, it sadly doesn't work like that for the majority of us. Let's bring back this wrinkly bugger, shall we? And talk about cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the amount of mental effort we perceive as being involved in an activity and how much of that we can handle at one time. To our brains, things like learning a skill, problem solving, trying something new, or just anything that would require some effort all have a higher cognitive load. This includes reading. This is made worse by the amount of working memory or current mental load you have going on. So if you're currently processing world events, news, or even things happening in your personal life, the amount of cognitive load you have to give to a difficult task is significantly reduced. So instead, we opt for whatever is easier, and sometimes the easier thing actually makes everything worse. If you're reaching for your phone and scrolling on social media, you're likely reinforcing the negative cycle of fight or flight with bad news or content that makes you feel bad, which leads to cognitive load problems. And the cycle continues. Frustrating, isn't it? Our brains are hardwired to protect us, which is a good thing, but we aren't running from wildlife. A lot of us don't have any current threats in our lives that would need this kind of hardwiring to exist on a daily basis. So is there anything we can do about this? I've mentioned a few things within this video that are causing us to struggle with reading. I've talked about endless news that's causing fight or flight and cognitive load, which causes us to pick something easier. I'll talk about each in turn, starting with the news. Let me start by saying that I don't think the solution here is to cut yourself off from the news. There is great value in being connected to accurate news sources and staying informed. For me, this is part of my life. Being aware of what is happening in the world allows me to make critical and informed choices when it comes to the things I can control, like voting, boycotting, and voting with my money. I do think the solution, however, is balance. The reality is you could be connected to world events constantly. You could keep a tab open with a live newsfeed while you work. You could scroll social media during your lunch break, and the algorithm would send you more and more and more content from people on the ground. You could do all of these things all the time, but you would suffer. This isn't just me saying this because I feel sad or angry when I'm looking at the news. It is science. Stephen Stosny, who specializes in treating people suffering from anger and resentment, said in an American Psychological Association article, "Along with propelling anger and anxiety, the constant news exposure seems to erode one's resilience. It lowers your coping capacity, so things that normally you'd cope with okay, you are not coping with as well." So instead, setting boundaries between you and when you consume this information is so important. For me, I only look at news media at times during the day after I have made myself a priority. This usually means just before dinner, but never before bed, and I try to avoid it first thing in the morning too. If I'm having a particularly bad day, or something is going on in my life at that time, I won't look at all. I will come back to it when I feel mentally prepared to do so. And I want to say a word to the activists here. I understand that you feel like you need to constantly be on. The weight of your responsibility and the pressure is high. You feel it constantly, and you want to help as much as you can. But there is nothing worse for your cause than you burning out because you've not entered yourself into that equation. Please make time for rest and set some boundaries for you and the activists around you. When you do this, you are reducing your fight or flight. You're not constantly in this state because you're giving yourself relief. You're telling your brain that it doesn't need to be in that state constantly, and the more you assert these boundaries, the better it will get. It might take some time, but it will. In the article I shared earlier, they talked about a study that looked at the relationship between news and stress during the pandemic. This part of that I thought was worth sharing with you. Overall, all types of news media consumption increased emotional distress, but television and social media exposure were more strongly associated. Younger adults and women were more vulnerable. People with conservative ideology were less likely to be distressed. This, to me, told me that I needed to factor in rest more. This is why strategic news consumption is important. Not to avoid it, but to avoid burnout. Okay. So let's say you've set these boundaries. You're still engaged and switched on, but in a much more healthy and balanced way. Now let's talk about cognitive load. You've likely reduced your cognitive load by default because you're setting boundaries with news media. However, your phone is still an easier choice. For you, this might not actually be your phone that you're choosing. You might be opting to play video games or binge watching TV series. At this point, you have some choices to make. If whatever is going on in your life or world events are too heavy on your mind to be solved by setting boundaries with the information you consume, then let's talk about that. You don't have to be reading as much right now. If things feel heavy and you're trying to force reading to make you feel better, you might be making yourself feel worse. By forcing reading, you're probably not enjoying the books that you normally would. You might be, in general, getting really frustrated with yourself, blaming yourself for not being able to do something you think you should be able to do. None of that is good. If that's not you though, and instead you've set boundaries, you have better balance, but you're still struggling to read, I think you have two options. 1. Accept that this is happening and be okay with it. You might be reading a little less or nothing for a while. Not forever, but for a little while. Take a break from reading and focus on another hobby that might use less cognitive load. If you don't have any right now, it might be worth trying something out. 2. Bring in easier reads. To me, this means reading more graphic novels, short cozy fiction like under 200 pages, manga, and short audiobooks. This could look slightly different for you, but by opting for the types of books that require less cognitive load than, say, an epic fantasy, you'll have the capacity to actually focus on them and enjoy them. Now more than ever, we are having to be so much more self-aware, especially in how we use social media and absorb the news. We have to be kind to ourselves, sure, but we also need to be aware of why this is happening and make some small changes to combat it. Hopefully this video, if not solved anything for you, at least explained why it's happening. But I would love to know from you. Have you been struggling to read recently? How have you combated this problem in the past? I would love to know, so leave me a comment. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time for another video.